Miss Marple and the Halloween Deception. Welcome to Velvet Clues, where the most perplexing mysteries unfold like old letters in forgotten drawers. I'm your host, Connor, and tonight we step into the world of Miss Jane Marple, that keen observer of human nature who finds darkness lurking beneath the most festive occasions. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Are you tucked away in a cozy corner with tea, or perhaps walking through autumn leaves? Share your location in the comments. Now settle in, dear listeners, as we follow Miss Marple through a Halloween night where death wore a costume and murder sent out invitations. Let's begin. Chapter 1. An advertisement most peculiar. The morning of October 28th dawned crisp over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, knitting needles clicking, when Florence entered, carrying the newspaper, with an expression of puzzlement. "There's something most odd in the Gazette today, Miss Marple," Florence announced. "Everyone in the village is talking about it." Miss Marple accepted the paper and read the advertisement that Florence had folded open. Bordered in black among the usual notices was an announcement that made her eyebrows rise. "A murder will occur at 42 Maple Street during trick-or-treat hours, Halloween night, 7:45 in the evening. Witnesses welcome." It was signed simply, "The Host." "Well," Miss Marple murmured, "how very theatrical." Florence explained that Mrs. Baker at the post office believed it was reclusive Mr. Whitlock, finally opening his house for Halloween. The millionaire had lived behind high walls for 20 years since making his fortune in shipping, hardly speaking to anyone except his ward Sophie. "Everyone thinks it must be an elaborate haunted house," Florence said enthusiastically. "The young people are terribly excited." Miss Marple studied the advertisement carefully. The precise timing and formal phrasing troubled her. In her experience, when people announced dramatic events with such specificity, they had very particular reasons. Throughout the day, the mysterious advertisement dominated village conversation. By tea time, Miss Marple had received 3 visitors, each speculating about the upcoming event. The consensus was that Whitlock was planning theatrical entertainment, perhaps introducing Sophie to society. "The girl turns 21 on Halloween," Mrs. Dane informed Miss Marple. "I heard she's set to inherit quite a fortune on her birthday. Perhaps Mr. Whitlock wants to celebrate by opening his doors." Miss Marple nodded politely, but her mind worked methodically. A reclusive millionaire, an orphaned ward coming of age, a fortune to be inherited, a public announcement of murder. These elements formed a troubling pattern. Her great-niece Diana arrived for an extended visit, excited about attending what everyone assumed would be an elaborate mystery party. Miss Marple offered to accompany her, confessing curiosity about Whitlock's establishment. In the following days, Miss Marple made discreet inquiries. Whitlock had made his fortune in shipping, though there were whispers of questionable practices. Sophie was his late cousin's daughter, raised in isolation with tutors rather than school. Those who encountered her described a frightened, pale girl who had lost weight recently. Dr. Haydock confirmed Sophie had never been his patient. "Whitlock brings physicians from London, claims she needs specialized care. I've always found that suspicious. Healthy young women shouldn't need constant medical attention." Miss Marple felt pieces arranging into a disturbing picture. A young woman approaching inheritance, a guardian with questionable ethics, mysterious illnesses requiring specialists, and now a public murder announcement, precisely when Sophie's independence would threaten someone's control. On Halloween morning, she visited Dr. Haydock again. If one were poisoning someone gradually, what symptoms might appear? His expression sharpened. "Weight loss, pallor, weakness, digestive complaints. Why do you ask?" "Merely curious," Miss Marple replied, though they both knew better. As evening fell, St. Mary Mead transformed for Halloween. By 7 o'clock, crowds moved toward Maple Street, drawn by curiosity and promised entertainment. Miss Marple and Diana joined them, passing through the newly opened gates of the Meadowbank estate. The house blazed with light after years of darkness, decorated elaborately with cobwebs and orange lights. A crowd gathered on the porch. Miss Marple positioned herself near the front, her instincts warning that something was profoundly wrong. At 7:40, a thin, nervous young woman appeared. Sophie Granger wore a simple blue dress and looked terrified. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Mr. Whitlock will join us shortly. Please remain on the porch until exactly 7:45. Miss Marple studied the scene carefully. The announced murder was not entertainment, but something far more sinister, and she intended to witness every detail when death came calling. Chapter 2. The lights go out at 7:45. The crowd grew increasingly excited as 7:45 approached. Children in costume darted between adults while fog machine mist created eerie atmosphere. Miss Marple maintained her position near the front, her keen eyes recording every detail. Sophie Granger had not reappeared after her brief announcement. Heavy curtains blocked most windows, creating an effective barrier between inside and outside. 7:42, Diana whispered excitedly. Just 3 more minutes. Dr. Haydock edged closer to Miss Marple. If your suspicions are correct, we may witness something far more serious than entertainment. Indeed, Miss Marple agreed quietly. At 7:44, Edgar Whitlock appeared in the doorway. He was tall and distinguished with silver hair, wearing an expensive suit and holding a crystal bowl of candy. His expression was jovial, though Miss Marple detected tension in his shoulders. "Welcome, welcome," Whitlock called. "Thank you for accepting my unusual invitation. I thought it was time I participated in community activities." He raised the candy bowl. "Now, as promised, we have a murder scheduled for precisely 7:45. At exactly 7:45, 3 things happened simultaneously. The porch lights went out completely. A sound like a gunshot echoed from inside. Someone screamed in the darkness. Chaos erupted. Children shrieked, adults shouted, people stumbled backward. Miss Marple remained remarkably still, her senses alert. She heard running footsteps inside, something heavy falling, a door slamming. The lights returned after 30 seconds. Several people had fallen, children were crying, but the sight on the porch transformed concern into horror. Edgar Whitlock lay crumpled on the doorstep, the crystal bowl shattered beside him. Blood spread across his suit from a gunshot wound to his chest. His eyes stared sightlessly at the Halloween sky. Dr. Haydock pushed through immediately, kneeling beside Whitlock. After brief examination, he looked at Inspector Craddock and shook his head. "He's dead, shot through the heart at close range. Death would have been instantaneous." Inspector Craddock took charge, instructing people to remain and sending Sergeant Lake to secure the house. The crowd's excitement had evaporated completely. Miss Marple wasn't looking at Whitlock's body. Her attention focused on the house interior, where she'd glimpsed blue fabric disappearing down a hallway. Sophie Granger, fleeing from something or someone. "Inspector," Miss Marple said quietly, "I believe you should search for Miss Granger immediately. She may be in considerable danger." Craddock dispatched constables into the house. The remaining officers began taking statements, though darkness during the crucial moment meant no one had seen the shooting. Diana clung to Miss Marple's arm. "Aunt Jane, that man is really dead. This wasn't a performance." "No, my dear," Miss Marple said gently. "Mr. Whitlock's advertisement was accurate. A murder occurred precisely as promised. The question is why he felt compelled to advertise his own death." Miss Marple's sharp eyes continued scanning, noting details. The candy was expensive imported chocolates, not typical trick-or-treat fare. Whitlock's position suggested he faced the doorway when shot, meaning the killer was inside. No signs of forced entry suggested Whitlock had admitted his murderer willingly. Commotion inside drew attention. Constables emerged with housekeeper Mrs. Chen, who was distraught. "Miss Sophie gone," she cried. "Her room empty. Her coat and shoes missing. Someone take her. I hear car driving away during darkness." Craddock's expression grew grim. "When did you last see Miss Granger?" "Just before 7:45. She come to kitchen, very frightened. Say something. Wrong, but won't tell me. Then lights go out, gunshot, and she gone." Miss Marple felt pieces clicking into place. The announced murder had been a desperate warning. Whitlock knew his death was planned and tried ensuring witnesses. But the true target was Sophie, who would inherit at midnight. Someone planned to ensure she never claimed that inheritance. "Inspector," Miss Marple said urgently, "we're dealing with 2 crimes. Mr. Whitlock was murdered, but Sophie Granger has been kidnapped. Unless I'm mistaken, someone plans to ensure she never lives to inherit her fortune." Chapter 3. a bowl of poisoned candy. The investigation moved into Whitlock's study, where Inspector Craddock established his command post. The room was impressive, lined with books and maritime paintings. A large desk dominated the space, covered with papers requiring examination. Miss Marple accompanied Craddock and Dr. Haydock inside. The remaining witnesses were being interviewed systematically, though no one had seen anything useful during the blackout. "The question," Craddock said, "is where to begin. We have a murdered host, a missing heiress, and 50 witnesses who saw nothing. And we have this." He indicated the newspaper advertisement displayed on the desk. "Why advertise your own murder?" "Because he wanted witnesses," Miss Marple said quietly. "Mr. Whitlock discovered something terrible he couldn't prevent alone. He arranged for the village to be present, hoping attention would protect his ward." Dr. Haydock examined a candy from the broken bowl. "Look at this. Austrian chocolates, very expensive. Not typical trick-or-treat candy, but special gifts." Miss Marple took the candy and examined it carefully. The wrapper was intact, but holding it to light revealed the chocolate inside appeared melted and reformed, as though unwrapped, altered, and repackaged. "Inspector," she said slowly, "these candies were intended for Sophie, her 21st birthday celebration, not for trick-or-treaters, but specifically for her." Craddock's expression sharpened. "You're suggesting someone poisoned candy intended for Miss Granger?" "I'm suggesting Mr. Whitlock discovered this poisoning attempt and took drastic action. He announced the murder to ensure witnesses, hoping their presence would deter whoever planned to harm Sophie. But the plotter was more ruthless than anticipated. Rather than abandon the scheme, he killed Whitlock and kidnapped Sophie during chaos." Dr. Haydock tested the chocolate using his chemical kit. After several minutes, he looked up gravely. "Arsenic, a substantial dose. These chocolates are definitely poisoned." The discovery sent chills through the room. Mrs. Chen was brought for questioning, explaining that Whitlock bought special candy 3 days ago for Sophie's birthday party, very particular about it, testing one piece himself. "Did he become ill?" Craddock asked. "No, but he very upset after testing. He make phone calls, talk to lawyer in London. Mr. Pemberton come down yesterday. They meet long time. Argue, I think." The lawyer's mention caught Miss Marple's attention. "Mr. Pemberton visited yesterday? Did he leave after their meeting?" "No, he stay night as guest. Still here when lights go out. He's supposed to witness Miss Sophie's inheritance papers at midnight." Craddock immediately sent constables to search for Pemberton. Miss Marple suspected what they would find. The lawyer's presence during crucial moments, his role as trustee, and his convenient availability painted a deeply suspicious picture. While waiting, Miss Marple examined desk papers. Among correspondence was a letter from a London banking firm dated 1 week earlier, concerning irregularities in Sophie's trust fund accounts and requesting urgent attention to significant discrepancies. "Inspector, read this," Miss Marple said, handing him the letter. Mr. Whitlock had discovered financial misconduct related to Sophie's inheritance. Someone had been embezzling from her trust fund. Craddock read with growing alarm, then pulled additional papers from the desk. Bank statements, accounting records, and Whitlock's investigation notes all documented systematic theft from Sophie's accounts over years. The amounts exceeded £200,000. "The lawyer," Craddock said grimly. "Pemberton had complete control during Sophie's minority. If Whitlock discovered the embezzlement and confronted him, Pemberton would have powerful motive to silence them both." Constables returned with troubling news. Pemberton's room was empty, belongings gone. Neighbours reported seeing a black car speeding from the house's rear entrance during the confusion. The lawyer had fled with Sophie. "He can't risk letting her reach midnight," Miss Marple said quietly. "She would discover the theft immediately and pursue charges. He needs her to die before her birthday, preferably appearing accidental." Dr. Haydock checked his watch. 8:15 now. Midnight is less than 4 hours away. "Which means he'll act desperately," Craddock added. "We need to find them quickly." "I don't believe you'll find them on the roads," Miss Marple interrupted gently. "Mr. Pemberton is too clever. He knows you'll search for his car, so he'll have hidden them somewhere close, somewhere he can wait until after midnight." "But where?" Craddock demanded. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "I suggest examining Mr. Pemberton's connection to this area more carefully. People choose places they know for desperate crimes. places where they feel confident of success. As investigation continued, Miss Marple stood at the window. Somewhere a frightened young woman was in mortal danger, and time was running out. Chapter 4. The Attorney's Clever Alibi. Inspector Craddock's investigation into Gerald Pemberton revealed a career built on careful manipulation. The lawyer specialized in estate management and trust administration, with an impeccable reputation and sterling references. 2. Perfect, Miss Marple observed, reviewing the hastily assembled file. In my experience, people with such unblemished reputations work very hard to maintain appearances, precisely because they have something significant to hide. Financial analysis of Sophie's trust fund painted a damning picture. Pemberton had been siphoning money gradually for 8 years, using inflated fees, fictional expenses, and outright embezzlement. He'd been careful to keep thefts small enough to avoid detection while accumulating substantial personal fortune. But he made a mistake, Dr. Haydock noted. He got greedy this past year. The amounts increased significantly, enough to trigger the bank's review that alerted Whitlock. Because time was running out, Miss Marple said thoughtfully. Sophie's 21st birthday approached when she'd gain control and inevitably discover the theft. He needed to steal as much as possible while planning to eliminate her before exposure. The timeline became clearer. Pemberton visited regularly to maintain control, each visit providing opportunity to monitor Sophie's health. The girl's mysterious illnesses, diagnosed by London specialist Pemberton recommended, took on sinister significance. He was poisoning her gradually, Dr. Haydock said with certainty. Low doses to keep her weak and compliant, hoping she'd die naturally before reaching majority. When that didn't work quickly enough, he escalated to the candy plan. But Edgar Whitlock had been observant. The shipping magnate tested one poisoned chocolate, discovered the arsenic, and realized his ward was in immediate danger. His desperate solution was advertising the murder, creating a public spectacle, making any attempt on Sophie's life impossible to hide. Except Pemberton adapted, Craddock said grimly. He killed Whitlock instead and used chaos to kidnap Sophie. Now he has her hidden, waiting until after midnight, when her inheritance reverts. Miss Marple studied a map of St. Mary Mead. Where would he take her? The search covered obvious places, yet you found nothing. Perhaps they've left the area, Sergeant Lake suggested. No, Miss Marple said with certainty. Mr. Pemberton needs to maintain his alibi. He must claim he was at the house when Whitlock was killed, that he too was a victim. To do that, he needs to return to the village and present himself as confused and concerned. This observation sparked new investigation. If Pemberton planned returning to maintain innocence, he must have hidden Sophie somewhere he could access quickly while having plausible explanation for temporary absence. Mrs. Chen provided the breakthrough. He always stay in East Wing guest room, but this time he asked specifically for that room. Say it more quiet, better for working. Before, he never care which room. Miss Marple and Craddock immediately examined the East Wing. The guest room appeared ordinary, but Miss Marple's keen eyes noticed the closet seemed shallower than room. Dimensions should allow. Thorough search revealed a hidden door behind a false panel. Beyond lay a narrow staircase descending into darkness, part of the house's original Victorian construction when servants' passages were common. The old smuggler's tunnel, Mrs. Chen explained. I forget it even there. Mr. Whitlock have it sealed years ago. Only entrance from this room. But someone had unsealed it recently, Miss Marple noted. Pemberton had prepared his escape route in advance. Following the tunnel with torches, they discovered it led to an old boathouse at the property's edge, hidden among overgrown willows by a small pond. The structure appeared abandoned, but recent disturbance suggested visits within the past day. He's been planning this for weeks, Craddock said. Prepared the tunnel, stocked this location. Look, camp bed, food, water. He intended holding her here. But the boathouse was empty. Time marched toward midnight, and they seemed no closer to finding Sophie. Miss Marple stood in the doorway, mind working. He's not here because it's too obvious once we discovered the tunnel. He would have realized we'd traced the passage. So he moved her again, somewhere nearby, but less connected. But where? Craddock's frustration was evident. Who else knew about this property's hidden features? Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Chen forgot. Whitlock sealed it, but Pemberton knew, which suggests someone told him from before Whitlock's ownership. Research revealed the property belonged to the Ridley family before Whitlock purchased it. The last surviving Ridley, Thomas, worked briefly as Whitlock's caretaker before dismissal for drunkenness. Find Thomas Ridley, Miss Marple instructed. I believe he's had recent contact with Mr. Pemberton and can tell us about other hidden features even Mrs. Chen doesn't know. As search intensified and the clock crept toward 9:30, Miss Marple felt time's weight. Sophie was close, in terrible danger, and Halloween night was giving way to the midnight hour that would seal her fate. Chapter 5. Sophie's Inheritance at Midnight. Thomas Ridley was located at the Fox and Hounds, deep into evening drinking. Mention of Gerald Pemberton caused immediate alarm in his bloodshot eyes. Under Inspector Craddock's stern questioning, the former caretaker's composure crumbled. I didn't know he was going to hurt anyone, Ridley insisted shakily. He just wanted to know about the old house, hidden rooms and passages. Said he was writing a book about Victorian estates. Paid me £50 just for information. What did you tell him? Craddock demanded. Ridley's recitation revealed comprehensive information about the Meadowbank estate's secrets. Beyond the tunnel already discovered, there were several concealed spaces, including a priest hole in the library, a hidden wine cellar with separate exterior entrance, and most significantly, an old ice house built into the hillside behind the property. The ice house, Ridley explained nervously. It's not on any modern plans, built in 1860, used for storing ice before refrigeration. My grandfather told me stories. The walls are 3 feet thick, completely soundproof. You could scream yourself hoarse and nobody would hear. Miss Marple felt a chill. An ice house would be the perfect prison, isolated, soundproof, and easily secured. If Pemberton imprisoned Sophie there, she could call for help until her voice failed without anyone hearing. "Show us," Craddock commanded. Within minutes they were moving through darkened grounds, following Ridley's uncertain directions toward the hidden ice house. The structure was indeed difficult to find, concealed by decades of overgrowth and deliberately camouflaged with earth and vegetation. Only Ridley's knowledge of its precise location allowed them to identify the heavy wooden door set into the hillside, secured with a modern padlock gleaming in their torchlight. "Stand back," Craddock ordered, then fired his revolver at the lock. The shot echoed as the padlock shattered. They pulled open the door, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "Miss Granger," Craddock called down. "Sophie, can you hear me?" A faint sound drifted up, possibly a voice or water dripping. Miss Marple descended carefully behind Craddock and Dr. Haydock, her torch beam cutting through underground gloom. They found Sophie huddled in a corner, bound and gagged but alive. Her eyes widened with hope and relief as she saw her rescuers. Dr. Haydock immediately checked her vital signs while Craddock removed the gag and cut her bonds. "Are you hurt?" Haydock asked gently. Sophie shook her head, trembling violently. "He said I had to die before midnight. Said it was nothing personal, just business. He left me here hours ago. Said he'd be back to finish it." "You're safe now," Miss Marple assured her, wrapping her own coat around the girl's shoulders. "Mr. Pemberton won't harm you, but we need to know everything that happened." Sophie's story emerged in halting fragments. She'd been suspicious of Pemberton for weeks, noticing discrepancies in trust fund reports. When Whitlock tested the poisoned candy and confronted Pemberton yesterday, she'd overheard part of their argument. "Uncle Edgar wanted to call the police immediately," Sophie explained, but Pemberton convinced him to wait, said he needed time to gather financial documents to prove the embezzlement. He promised to bring everything tonight. Uncle Edgar believed him. "But Pemberton had other plans," Miss Marple said quietly. Sophie nodded, tears streaming. "During the blackout, Pemberton grabbed me from the doorway. I heard the gunshot, knew Uncle Edgar was dead, but Pemberton had his hand over my mouth. He dragged me through a hidden passage while everyone was screaming. Brought me to that boathouse, then moved me here when he heard you searching." "Where is he now?" Craddock asked urgently. "He left around 8 o'clock. Said he needed to return to the house, play the confused attorney, help with investigation. He was going to come back after midnight, after my birthday passed, to make my death look like an accident." Sophie's voice broke. "The inheritance reverts to distant cousins if I die before 21. Pemberton thought he could maintain control for them, continue stealing for years. Miss Marple checked her watch. 10:15, nearly 2 hours until midnight. But Pemberton didn't know they'd found Sophie. He would plan returning to complete his murderous scheme. "Inspector," she said thoughtfully, "we have an opportunity to turn Mr. Pemberton's plans against him. He expects to find Sophie helpless when he returns. What if instead he finds a trap?" Craddock grasped her meaning. "Use Sophie as bait." "Not if we do it properly," Miss Marple assured him. "We have time to prepare, and Mr. Pemberton has no reason to suspect we've found this location." Sophie, despite her ordeal, showed remarkable courage. "I'll do it. Uncle Edgar died trying to protect me. I want to help catch his murderer." The plan was arranged with precision. Sophie was returned to the ice house with Dr. Haydock stationed nearby. Constables were positioned in concealed locations. Craddock and Miss Marple took positions allowing observation while remaining hidden. "He may not come until very close to midnight," Craddock warned. "Then we shall wait," Miss Marple replied calmly. The wait seemed interminable. At 11:30 they heard a car engine, then silence. Footsteps approached through undergrowth. Gerald Pemberton emerged carrying a briefcase and bottle. His handsome face looked haggard and desperate. He unlocked the door with a key, never noticing the broken padlock replaced with a simple latch. Inside, they heard his voice, false friendliness masking menace. "Well, Miss Granger, I'm afraid your time has run out." "Or perhaps yours has," came Sophie's voice, stronger than before. Running footsteps echoed as Pemberton realized the trap. He burst from the chamber, briefcase forgotten, only to find himself surrounded by constables with weapons drawn. "Gerald Pemberton," Craddock announced, "I'm arresting you for the murder of Edgar Whitlock and the attempted murder of Sophie Granger." Pemberton's shoulders sagged in defeat. As constables led him away, Sophie was helped from the ice house, wrapped in blankets but safe. "You saved my life," she said to Miss Marple. "Your uncle's warning saved you," Miss Marple corrected gently. "His announced murder ensured we were watching. Without his courage, Mr. Pemberton's scheme might have succeeded." As midnight approached and Sophie's 21st birthday arrived, she was safely installed in the vicarage. Her inheritance was secure, her guardian's murderer captured, and justice, though delayed by Halloween tragedy, was finally assured. Chapter 6. A briefcase full of forged documents. The morning after Halloween dawned grey and cold. Inspector Craddock had established a permanent command post in Whitlock's study. An investigation into Gerald Pemberton's crimes was revealing layers of deception extending far beyond the immediate tragedy. Miss Marple arrived shortly after breakfast. She found Craddock examining contents of Pemberton's abandoned briefcase, retrieved from the ice house after his arrest. "Good morning, Inspector," she greeted him. "I trust Mr. Pemberton spent an uncomfortable night." "Thoroughly uncomfortable," Craddock confirmed, "though he's said nothing without his solicitor. The man's preparing to fight every charge." He gestured toward briefcase contents spread across the desk. "But I don't think he'll have much success. Look at what we found." The briefcase was a masterclass in criminal preparation. Among its contents were forged documents showing Sophie Granger's death from natural causes, complete with falsified medical reports and death certificates pre-signed by corrupt London physicians. There was also a revised will for Whitlock, dated 2 days earlier, leaving Sophie's inheritance in Pemberton's control even after her majority. "He thought of everything," Miss Marple observed, examining the forged death certificate. Or rather, he thought he had. See here? The certificate is dated October 31st, but lists time of death as 11:45 evening. Mr. Pemberton was so focused on ensuring Sophie died before midnight, he didn't realize this timing would immediately raise questions. Craddock studied the document more carefully. If Sophie died at 11:45 from exposure and shock, there would be obvious questions about why no search was conducted earlier. The timing makes it clear this death was planned, not accidental. Further examination revealed additional evidence. Bank documents showed Pemberton transferring Sophie's embezzled funds to offshore accounts under shell companies. Correspondence with corrupt physicians indicated years-long conspiracy to keep Sophie weak through subtle poisoning. Most damning was a detailed timeline Pemberton created, outlining each step from poisoned candy to Sophie's eventual accidental death. He was meticulous, Dr. Haydock observed. These physicians prescribed treatments that actually worsened Sophie's condition while appearing to help. The medications contained small amounts of arsenic and other toxins, administered gradually to avoid detection. "Can these doctors be prosecuted?" Miss Marple inquired. "Scotland Yard is already working on warrants," Craddock assured her. "This conspiracy extends well beyond St. Mary Mead." Mrs. Chen brought tea and answered additional questions about household routine. Her testimony revealed Pemberton visiting more frequently in recent months, always bringing special foods and medicines he claimed were prescribed by Sophie's London specialists. "I'm not suspicious at time," Mrs. Chen said sadly. "Mr. Pemberton seems so caring. I not know he making her sick on purpose." Miss Marple patted the housekeeper's hand sympathetically. "You mustn't blame yourself. Mr. Pemberton was exceptionally skilled at deception." Interrogation of Thomas Ridley provided additional insights. The lawyer had visited Ridley multiple times over 3 months, paying cash for information about the estate's hidden features. He had also asked detailed questions about the property's isolation and whether certain areas would be visible from neighbouring houses. "He was planning for months," Craddock said grimly. This wasn't impulsive, but carefully orchestrated. Whitlock's discovery of embezzlement forced him to accelerate his timeline, but the basic framework was already in place. Around mid-morning, Sophie Granger arrived at the estate, accompanied by Mrs. Clement from the vicarage. The young woman looked considerably better after rest, though shadows under her eyes testified to trauma endured. She had come to collect personal items and understand what had been done to her. "I want to see everything," Sophie said firmly. "Uncle Edgar died protecting me. I owe it to his memory to understand the full scope of Mr. Pemberton's crimes." Craddock hesitated, but Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "I think Miss Granger has earned the right to know the truth. Shielding her from unpleasant facts won't help her recovery." They walked Sophie through the evidence, explaining each element of Pemberton's scheme. She listened with growing anger and sorrow, occasionally asking perceptive questions that impressed both Craddock and Miss Marple with her resilience. "The poisoned candy," Sophie said, picking up one of the wrapped chocolates. "These were expensive Austrian chocolates, Uncle Edgar's favourite. He bought them specially for my birthday. Wanted to share something he loved." Her voice caught. "Pemberton must have switched them somehow." "We believe he did so during his visit 2 days ago," Craddock confirmed. "He would have had access and opportunity while your guardian was occupied." Sophie set down the chocolate carefully. "Uncle Edgar saved my life by testing one. He must have realised immediately what Pemberton had done. That's why he placed the newspaper advertisement, arranged for everyone to watch. He knew Pemberton would try something and wanted witnesses present." "Your uncle was brave and clever," Miss Marple said warmly. "Unfortunately, he underestimated how ruthless the lawyer would be." The examination of forged will revealed another layer to Pemberton's conspiracy. The document would have given him continued control over Sophie's inheritance even after her death, allowing him to manage funds supposedly held in trust for distant relatives who had no idea they were named as beneficiaries. "He could have continued stealing for years," Craddock explained. "By the time anyone questioned the arrangements, Pemberton would have diverted most of the fortune into his offshore accounts." As afternoon progressed, the full scope of Gerald Pemberton's villainy became clear. This wasn't merely an embezzling lawyer, but a calculating predator who had spent years systematically destroying a young woman's health while manipulating her guardian's trust. The Halloween murder was simply the culmination of a long conspiracy of cruelty and greed. Chapter 7. The Neighbour Who Heard Everything. As investigation continued, Inspector Craddock focused on building an airtight case against Gerald Pemberton. The lawyer, now represented by expensive London counsel, was maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. His defence strategy appeared to be attacking evidence credibility and claiming he'd been deceived by unknown conspirators. During canvassing of neighbours, a crucial witness emerged who would demolish Pemberton's planned defence. Mrs. Agatha Birch lived in the cottage adjacent to the Whitlock estate, separated from the main house by only a thin line of trees. She was a widow in her 70s, hard of hearing, but exceptionally observant, with a habit of noting everything occurring in her neighbourhood. "I keep a journal," Mrs. Birch explained when interviewed by Sergeant Lake. "My late husband was a barrister, always said documentation was essential. I've written down everything interesting that's happened on this street for 40 years. Her journals proved to be gold mines of information. Sergeant Lake brought several volumes to Inspector Craddock's attention, and Miss Marple was invited to help review them for relevant entries. Mrs. Birch had noted Pemberton's visits with remarkable detail. Every date, approximate time and duration was recorded, along with observations about the lawyer's demeanour and unusual circumstances. More importantly, she had noted conversations she overheard through her open bedroom window, which faced the Whitlock property's driveway, where Pemberton often stood talking on his mobile phone while smoking. October 15th, Miss Marple read aloud. Mr. Pemberton on telephone in driveway at approximately 4:30 afternoon. Heard him say the girl is becoming suspicious and the old man is asking too many questions about accounts. Also heard him say, need to accelerate timeline, November 1st deadline is firm. November 1st, Craddock said excitedly. Sophie's 21st birthday. This proves Pemberton was planning something specifically tied to that date 2 weeks before the actual murder. The entries continued with increasing detail as Mrs. Birch became more interested in what she sensed was suspicious activity. On October 22nd, she noted Pemberton arriving with a large package he carried personally, rather than allowing Mrs. Chen to handle it. On October 28th, the day Whitlock placed the murder advertisement, Mrs. Birch observed a fierce argument between Pemberton and Whitlock in the garden. I couldn't hear everything, Mrs. Birch explained when questioned, but I distinctly heard Mr. Whitlock say something about police and prosecution. Pemberton's response was threatening, something like, "You'll regret this." They were quite heated. Most damning was Mrs. Birch's entry for Halloween night. She had been watching the commotion at the Whitlock house when she observed something no one else noticed. At precisely 7:42, I saw Mr. Pemberton exit the house through the library's French doors, she had written. He carried what appeared to be a long object wrapped in cloth. He moved quickly toward the rear of property, glancing around as though ensuring he wasn't observed. 3 minutes later, at 7:45 exactly, I heard the gunshot and saw the porch lights go out. This observation placed Pemberton away from the crowd and in possession of what was likely the murder weapon during the crucial window when Whitlock was shot. It completely undermined any attempt he might make to claim he'd been among innocent witnesses. "Mrs. Birch," Inspector Craddock said warmly, "your observations have provided evidence absolutely crucial to our prosecution. Would you be willing to testify in court?" The elderly woman drew herself up with dignity. "Certainly, Inspector. My late husband always said citizens have a duty to assist justice. I may be old and deaf, but my eyes work perfectly well, and I know what I saw." Miss Marple smiled at this declaration, recognizing a kindred spirit in observation and civic duty. "Mrs. Birch, might I ask whether you noticed anything else unusual in days leading up to Halloween?" Mrs. Birch consulted her most recent journal. "Actually, yes. On October 26th, very late at night, perhaps 1 or 2 in the morning, I was awakened by sounds from the Whitlock property. I looked out and saw lights moving in the grounds like torches. At the time, I assumed it was Mr. Whitlock checking something, but thinking about it now, the movement pattern suggested someone searching for something specific." "The ice house," Miss Marple said immediately. Mr. Pemberton was ensuring he knew exactly where to find it and that it would serve his purposes. He must have been testing the route from the house, timing how long it would take to move Sophie there. This deduction was supported by further entries describing Pemberton's subsequent visits. Mrs. Birch noted him spending unusual amounts of time in the grounds, often carrying packages or equipment, always when Whitlock was occupied elsewhere. "He was preparing everything meticulously," Craddock observed. "The tunnel, the boathouse, the ice house, each element checked and rechecked. This wasn't opportunity, but military-style operation." Mrs. Birch's journals also provided unexpected corroboration of Sophie's testimony about her gradually worsening health. Multiple entries noted the girl looking increasingly pale and unwell, struggling with tasks that should have been simple. "August 3rd, Miss Marple read, saw Miss Granger attempting to garden in afternoon. She appeared quite ill, had to sit down multiple times, and eventually Mrs. Chen helped her back inside. The poor child looked as though she might faint." Dr. Haydock, reviewing these observations alongside medical evidence, confirmed Sophie's symptoms were consistent with chronic low-dose arsenic poisoning. The deterioration Mrs. Birch documented matches precisely what we'd expect. Pemberton was killing her slowly, making it appear like natural illness. The weight of evidence from Mrs. Birch's meticulous record-keeping was devastating to Pemberton's defence. His lawyers, confronted with this new testimony during a preliminary hearing, began negotiating for a plea agreement that would spare their client the gallows in exchange for full confession. They know they can't win at trial, Craddock explained to Miss Marple. Mrs. Birch's journals, combined with physical evidence and Sophie's testimony, make conviction absolutely certain. The only question is whether Pemberton hangs or spends life in prison. Sophie, informed of these developments, expressed relief that a trial might be avoided. "I don't want to spend months reliving what he did to me and Uncle Edgar. If he'll confess and accept responsibility, that's enough." Miss Marple, understanding the wisdom in this position, supported Sophie's preference. Vengeance and justice are not the same thing. Sometimes the latter is better served by accepting practical resolution rather than demanding maximum punishment. As the day drew to a close, Mrs. Birch's contribution was formally recognised by Inspector Craddock, who thanked her effusively for her civic-minded documentation. The elderly woman accepted praise with quiet dignity, noting only that she'd done what any responsible citizen should do. "My late husband would have approved," she said simply. "He always said evil flourishes when good people fail to pay attention. I was paying attention, and I'm glad it helped catch that dreadful man." Walking back to her cottage that evening, Miss Marple reflected on the unexpected heroism of an elderly widow, whose careful observations had helped bring a murderer to justice. Chapter 8. Pemberton's Confession at Dawn. The negotiations for Gerald Pemberton's confession proceeded through the night. By dawn on November 2nd, an agreement had been reached. In exchange for full confession and cooperation in prosecuting co-conspirators, Pemberton would plead guilty to murder and receive life imprisonment rather than face execution. Inspector Craddock convened a formal session in the St. Mary Mead police station at 7 o'clock. Present were Pemberton and his lawyers, representatives from Scotland Yard and the Crown Prosecution Service, and as special witnesses, Miss Marple and Sophie Granger. The young heiress had insisted on being present to hear Pemberton admit his crimes directly. Gerald Pemberton looked considerably diminished from the distinguished attorney who'd arrived days earlier. His expensive suit was rumpled, silver hair, dishevelled, handsome face bearing marks of sleeplessness and stress. When he spoke, however, his voice retained educated precision that had served him well. "I will make a full statement," he began, reading from notes his lawyers prepared. "I admit to the murder of Edgar Whitlock and the attempted murder of Sophie Granger. I further admit to embezzlement from Miss Granger's trust fund, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempting to pervert the course of justice." The formal admission complete, Pemberton set aside his notes and spoke more naturally, as though relieved to finally unburden himself of elaborate lies he'd maintained for years. "It started innocently enough," he explained. 8 years ago I was managing Sophie's trust fund and noticed how little oversight there was. Edgar Whitlock was busy with his own affairs. Sophie was just a child, and the bank's review processes were perfunctory. I took a small amount, just a few £1,000s, telling myself I'd repay it when my investments matured. "But you didn't repay it," Sophie said quietly, the first word she'd spoken since the session began. "No," Pemberton admitted, meeting her eyes with something that might have been shame. "The investments failed, and I needed money to cover personal debts. So I took more, then more again. Each time I told myself it was temporary, that I'd eventually make it right. But amounts grew larger, and repayment became impossible." Miss Marple listened with detached fascination, observing a psychological case study. Pemberton's descent into criminality followed a pattern she'd seen before, the gradual erosion of ethics through small compromises until major crimes seemed like logical next steps. "When did you decide to kill Sophie?" Inspector Craddock asked bluntly. Pemberton flinched at the direct question. "Not until this past summer, when she began asking intelligent questions about trust fund management. She'd been receiving education from excellent tutors, was studying finance and accounting, preparing to take control of her inheritance. I realized she would discover the theft the moment she gained access to full records." "So, You began poisoning her, Dr. Haydock said grimly. Through physicians I recommended to Whitlock, Pemberton confirmed. Doctors willing to prescribe medications that would gradually weaken her, hopefully leading to natural death before her 21st birthday. It should have worked. The doses were carefully calculated. Symptoms mimicked genuine illness. But Sophie proved more resilient than expected. Sophie sat very still, face pale but composed. You were killing me slowly because it was convenient. Yes, Pemberton said simply. I won't insult you with excuses. It was monstrous, and I knew it was monstrous even as I did it. But I was trapped by my earlier crimes, and killing you seemed like the only way to prevent exposure and prison. The confession continued with Pemberton describing his escalating desperation as Sophie's birthday approached. The poisoning wasn't working quickly enough, and Whitlock was beginning to notice irregularities in financial reports. The idea of using poisoned candy came from Pemberton's research into famous poisoning cases. I purchased Austrian chocolates identical to ones Whitlock favoured, Pemberton explained. Carefully injected them with arsenic solution using a syringe, then resealed the wrappers so perfectly no one would notice tampering. I switched them with legitimate candies during my visit on October 29th. But Edgar tested one, Miss Marple interjected. He discovered your plan. Pemberton nodded wearily. He confronted me that same evening, threatened to go to police immediately. I convinced him to wait, told him I needed time to gather financial documents to prove the embezzlement, claimed I wanted to cooperate fully. He believed me, the trusting fool. So you killed him instead, Craddock said. I killed him, yes. The newspaper advertisement was his idea, his desperate attempt to protect Sophie by ensuring witnesses were present. I encouraged it, saw how I could use the chaos to commit murder and kidnap Sophie simultaneously. I brought my gun, hid it in the library before the party, then retrieved it when I claimed to be checking the electrical system during setup. Pemberton described his actions on Halloween night with clinical precision. He'd positioned himself near the electrical panel during crucial minutes before 7:45, prepared to cut power at exactly the right moment. When lights went out, he shot Whitlock from close range, knowing darkness and crowd noise would prevent identification. Then I grabbed Sophie from the doorway where she was standing, he continued. The crowd was screaming and pushing. Nobody noticed one more person moving through chaos. I dragged her through the hidden tunnel I'd prepared, stashed her in the boathouse initially, then moved her to the ice house when I heard search parties forming. You intended to kill her after midnight, Sophie said, voice steady despite horror. Yes, I had pills prepared, strong sedatives dissolved in water. You would have simply gone to sleep and not awakened. I planned to leave your body where it would be found the next day, making your death look like you'd fled in fear after Whitlock's murder and died from exposure. Pemberton's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Sophie. I know that means nothing, but I am genuinely sorry for what I did to you and your uncle. The session continued for several more hours, as Pemberton provided details about co-conspirators, corrupt physicians who assisted in Sophie's poisoning, shell companies created to hide embezzled funds, and offshore accounts where money had been transferred. Scotland Yard representatives took copious notes, planning the international investigation required to recover stolen assets and prosecute everyone involved. By mid-morning, the confession was complete. Pemberton signed multiple copies of his statement, each witnessed by his lawyers and the official court reporter. As he was led away to begin his life sentence, he paused to look once more at Sophie. I hope you'll have a good life, he said quietly. Use your inheritance wisely, trust people carefully, and don't let what I did poison your view of the world entirely. There's goodness still, even if I forgot how to find it. Sophie didn't respond, simply watched him leave with expression combining sorrow and relief. When the door closed, she finally allowed herself to cry. Quiet tears that Miss Marple understood were for everything she'd lost. It's finished now, Miss Marple said gently, offering Sophie a handkerchief. Mr. Pemberton will face justice, you're safe, and your inheritance is secure. Your uncle's sacrifice was not in vain. Chapter 9. Miss Marple solves the announced murder. 3 days after Pemberton's confession, Sophie Granger requested a private meeting with Miss Marple at the vicarage. The young woman had been recovering under Mrs. Clement's care, beginning the difficult process of rebuilding her life after years of manipulation and attempted murder. Miss Marple arrived to find Sophie looking considerably healthier, with colour returning to her cheeks and a steadiness in her demeanour that had been absent before. They settled in the vicarage's comfortable sitting room with tea and biscuits. "I wanted to thank you properly," Sophie began. "Uncle Edgar tried to protect me with his announced murder, but you actually succeeded in understanding what was happening and saving my life." "Your uncle's warning made all the difference," Miss Marple replied gently. "Without his courage in advertising the murder, Mr. Pemberton might have succeeded completely. The public nature of the event ensured we were all watching carefully." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that advertisement constantly. At first I thought Uncle Edgar was going mad, announcing his own death in the newspaper. But he was being brilliant, wasn't he? He knew Pemberton was planning something terrible, and that the best defence was making it impossible to hide." "Precisely," Miss Marple agreed. "Your uncle understood that private confrontation with Mr. Pemberton would be dangerous. By making the event public, he hoped to prevent any violence against you. Unfortunately, he underestimated Pemberton's ruthlessness and willingness to adapt his plans. Pemberton killed him anyway and used the chaos to kidnap me," Sophie said quietly. "But even that didn't work as Pemberton intended, because you realized immediately that I was the true target, not Uncle Edgar." Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. The pattern was clear once one understood the circumstances. Your approaching inheritance, your guardian's sudden concern about the trust fund, the poisoned candy intended specifically for your birthday celebration, all pointed towards someone desperate to prevent you from reaching 21 and discovering the embezzlement. "How did you know it was Pemberton specifically?" Sophie asked. "There were other people with access to the house and opportunity." "Several factors pointed toward your lawyer," Miss Marple explained. "First, the sophistication of the planning. The poisoned candy, the hidden tunnel, the ice house, all required someone with both knowledge of the property and considerable intelligence. Second, the financial motive. Only someone managing your trust fund would benefit from keeping you from your inheritance. Third, the timing. The Halloween murder occurred just hours before your birthday, suggesting someone working against a specific deadline." Sophie absorbed this explanation. "And the poisoning over the years, making me constantly ill so I'd be too weak to question anything?" "That was perhaps the cruelest element," Miss Marple said with genuine sadness. "Mr. Pemberton systematically destroyed your health to maintain control, making you dependent on him and his corrupt physicians. It's a mercy Dr. Haydock believes you'll make full recovery once the toxins clear your system." "I already feel stronger," Sophie confirmed. "It's remarkable how much better I feel now that I'm not being slowly poisoned. I'm starting to remember what it was like to have energy and clarity of thought." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Sophie spoke again. "I've decided to donate the Meadowbank estate to the village as a community centre, as I mentioned. I can't live in the house where Uncle Edgar died, but I want his memory honoured somehow. He gave his life to protect me." "That's a generous and appropriate memorial," Miss Marple said warmly. "Your uncle would be proud of your decision." Sophie smiled, the first genuine smile Miss Marple had seen from her. "I'm also establishing a trust fund for victims of financial fraud, particularly young women who've been manipulated by guardians or trustees. If my experience can help others avoid similar situations, then perhaps some good can come from this nightmare." "That's remarkably mature thinking," Miss Marple observed. "You're turning tragedy into purpose." "I learned from the best," Sophie replied. "Watching you work through the evidence, connecting pieces that seemed unrelated, understanding human nature well enough to predict behaviour, it was extraordinary. How did you develop such skills?" Miss Marple smiled slightly. "Years of observation, my dear. I've spent a lifetime watching people in this village and noticing patterns in human behaviour. Evil exists everywhere, even in quiet places like St. Mary Mead. But so does goodness, and understanding both requires patient attention to detail." "Will you teach me?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Not to solve murders, I hope I never encounter another, but to observe carefully, to understand people better, to protect myself from manipulation." "I'd be delighted," Miss Marple said warmly. "Though I suspect you've already learned the most important lesson. Trust your instincts. You sensed something was wrong with Mr. Pemberton long before you had proof. That intuition, combined with courage to act on it, is what ultimately saved you." Sophie nodded seriously. "I'll remember that, and I'll remember Uncle Edgar's courage in announcing the murder, making the danger public even though it cost him his life. Sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help, even in unconventional ways." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed. "Your uncle's announced murder was his way of crying out for help when he realized he couldn't protect you alone. It was both warning and invitation, asking the community to witness and thereby prevent tragedy. That it didn't prevent his own death doesn't diminish the brilliance of his strategy." As their conversation continued, Miss Marple reflected on the unusual case that had disrupted St. Mary Mead's Halloween festivities. The announced murder had indeed occurred exactly as advertised, but the true target and ultimate resolution had been far more complex than anyone initially suspected. The love of money had driven Gerald Pemberton to monstrous crimes, systematically poisoning a young woman and murdering her guardian to conceal embezzlement. But human courage and careful observation had triumphed, exposing the conspiracy and ensuring justice prevailed. "One more question," Sophie said, as their meeting drew to a close. "How do I move forward from this? How do I trust people again after learning that someone I trusted completely was trying to kill me?" Miss Marple considered the question carefully. "You move forward one day at a time, choosing carefully whom to trust, but not letting fear prevent all connection. Evil exists, but it's far outnumbered by ordinary goodness. Mr. Pemberton was an aberration, not the norm. Most people, even those with flaws, don't resort to murder and systematic cruelty." "I'll try to remember that," Sophie promised. "And remember, too, that you survived," Miss Marple added gently. "You're stronger than Mr. Pemberton believed, more resilient than his poisoning could destroy, and brave enough to face him in that ice house knowing you were bait for a trap. Those qualities will serve you well in whatever life you choose to build." Chapter 10. Miss Marple reflects on announced murders. 1 month after the Halloween tragedy, Miss Marple sat in her familiar spot by the sitting-room window, knitting needles creating their soothing rhythm while autumn deepened into early winter. St. Mary Mead had gradually returned to normal routines, though the Whitlock case remained a topic of considerable discussion. Sophie Granger had remained in the village during the aftermath, working with solicitors to untangle her finances and beginning to reclaim her life. The young woman visited Miss Marple regularly, and their friendship had deepened through shared experience of the Halloween night's events. This afternoon, Sophie was paying a farewell visit before departing for London, where she planned to continue her education and begin actively managing her now-recovered inheritance. She looked transformed from the pale, frightened girl Miss Marple had first glimpsed on that terrible evening. Health restored and confidence growing, Sophie seemed ready to face the world. "I wanted to thank you one final time before I leave," Sophie said, settling into the chair opposite Miss Marple. "You saved my life, and I'll never forget that." "My dear, you've thanked me quite sufficiently already," Miss Marple replied with a smile. "I'm simply glad we were able to prevent Mr. Pemberton from completing his terrible scheme." Sophie nodded, then pulled out a folded newspaper from her bag. "I've been thinking about Uncle Edgar's advertisement, the one that started everything. I found the original in his desk when I was packing his belongings. Look at this." She unfolded the paper to reveal not just the printed advertisement, but a handwritten draft in Edgar Whitlock's distinctive script. The draft showed multiple revisions, words crossed out and rewritten, as Whitlock struggled to phrase his desperate warning. "He must have written this after testing the poisoned candy," Sophie explained. "After he realized Pemberton was trying to kill me, and that confronting him privately had failed. This was his last desperate attempt to protect me." Miss Marple studied the draft carefully. The early versions were more explicit, directly warning of poison and naming Pemberton. But Whitlock had crossed these out, apparently realizing that being too specific might alert the lawyer and cause him to abandon his plans entirely rather than be caught. The final version, the one that appeared in the newspaper, was deliberately vague. An announced murder with time and location, witnesses explicitly welcomed. It was invitation and warning simultaneously, designed to force Pemberton's hand while ensuring community attention. Your uncle was remarkably clever, Miss Marple observed. He understood that vague warning would intrigue people enough to attend, while specific accusations might simply drive Mr. Pemberton underground. By making the announcement public but mysterious, he ensured maximum witnesses at the crucial moment. But he knew he might die, Sophie said quietly. These drafts show he considered that possibility. Look here, he wrote, even if I cannot be saved, Sophie must survive. He was willing to sacrifice himself to protect me. Miss Marple felt deep admiration for Edgar Whitlock's courage. He loved you very much, my dear, and his sacrifice was not in vain. Because of his announced murder, we were all watching when Pemberton acted. That attention ultimately saved your life, even though it couldn't save his own. They sat in contemplative silence before Sophie spoke again. Do you think he knew it was Pemberton specifically, or was he just aware someone was trying to kill me? I believe he knew, Miss Marple replied. The confrontation Mrs. Chen mentioned, Pemberton's promises to gather evidence, the timing of everything, your uncle had pieced it together. But he needed proof that would stand in court, and Mr. Pemberton was too clever to leave obvious evidence. So, your uncle created his own evidence by forcing Pemberton to act publicly. It's brilliant in a tragic way, Sophie mused. Uncle Edgar couldn't prove the poisoning or embezzlement quickly enough, so he arranged circumstances where Pemberton would have to reveal himself through action. Precisely, Miss Marple agreed. Though I suspect your uncle hoped the public attention would deter Mr. Pemberton entirely, that the lawyer would realize the risk was too great and abandon his scheme. Unfortunately, desperation made Pemberton reckless rather than cautious. Sophie carefully folded the draft advertisement and returned it to her bag. I'm going to frame this and keep it, a reminder of Uncle Edgar's courage and love. That's appropriate, Miss Marple said warmly, though I hope you'll also remember the lesson it teaches. When facing evil too powerful to confront alone, sometimes the bravest action is making the danger public, asking for community help, even in unconventional ways. I will, Sophie promised, and I'll remember your lesson too about observation and understanding human nature. Those skills might have prevented this tragedy if I'd developed them earlier. Miss Marple shook her head gently. You were systematically poisoned and manipulated from childhood, my dear. You cannot blame yourself for not seeing what Mr. Pemberton worked years to conceal. The fault lies entirely with him. As Sophie prepared to leave, she embraced Miss Marple warmly. I'll write often and visit when I can. You've become like the grandmother I never had. After Sophie departed, Miss Marple returned to her window and her knitting, reflecting on the unusual case of the announced murder. In her long experience, she had encountered many forms of evil, from petty jealousies to calculated cruelty. Gerald Pemberton's systematic destruction of a young woman's health for financial gain ranked among the most cold-blooded crimes she'd witnessed. Yet the case had also demonstrated profound good. Edgar Whitlock's sacrificial courage, Sophie's resilience and forgiveness, Mrs. Birch's civic-minded documentation, Dr. Haydock's careful medical analysis, Inspector Craddock's thorough investigation. Each person had contributed to justice prevailing. The announced murder, Miss Marple murmured to herself, as twilight gathered outside her window. Such a desperate gambit, yet it succeeded in its essential purpose. Sophie survived, and that's what mattered most to Edgar Whitlock. She resumed her knitting, needles clicking their familiar rhythm. St. Mary Mead would remember this Halloween for years to come, the night when death sent. Invitations and murder wore a costume, but the village would also remember how community attention and one elderly woman's careful observation had defeated evil's carefully laid plans. Sometimes, Miss Marple reflected, the simplest solutions were the most effective. Edgar Whitlock couldn't prove Pemberton's crimes quickly enough through conventional means, so he announced the murder publicly, forcing the conspiracy into light, where it could be witnessed and stopped. It was a lesson worth remembering. Evil flourished in darkness and secrecy, but sunshine and community vigilance remained powerful weapons against even the most carefully planned villainy. As darkness fell completely over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple smiled slightly and continued her knitting, content in the knowledge that justice had been served and a young woman had been given the chance to build the life that had nearly been stolen from her.